Um, we had a great night the other night at the bowling in wherever we went to. It was hard to find parking. I understand that. Next time we'll have 5 acres of space around the next centre, but it was a great night. It's always good to meet each other outside of a church environment, because you kind of act a little bit sort of Christian when we're here, but you know we sort of open up when we're having a good time. It was a marvellous time, and I tell you what, I used to go to quite a few 10-pin bowling places around the city because I had a couple of autistic clients that I used to work with for 5.5 years, and they loved to go bowling. But I must say that the Rosemount one was probably the best presented one that I have ever been to, and the management were absolutely wonderful to us. So we'll do other things coming up in the year, but we've got, as an outreach of that bowling thing and the men's getting together on the next Monday night, the 12th, Tim Long is speaking to us again as men. It's a men-only night, and I'd love as many men who can come here. And the last time we had this, it was absolutely amazing. Tim and I were invited to the Bicton Presbyterian Church a couple of Saturdays ago. Well, he was invited, and he wanted me to go along with him. And you don't ever show a pastor a microphone and sort of wave it sort of anywhere near them. So anyway, Tim did a really good speech, but there was an elderly lawyer there, a retired lawyer, whose son is also a lawyer. And he told all of the men at the meeting, and most of them were sort of, that elevated age. And this lawyer said to the men there, we're all at an age where we have made a will 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's completely and utterly inapplicable to your circumstances now. And he was really sort of forcing about that, because you leave a mess for your family, your kids, your executor, your guardianship, and all the rest of it. And he said, so please, please, please take this to heart. Go and have a look at your will. If it's out of date, take it to a lawyer and get it updated so that when you pass, it's not a drama for the family, right? When Tim finished talking, the silly boy said, has anyone got any comments? I said yes, and I walked right up. And they all looked at me. A couple of them sort of knew me, the men in the room, but I said, listen, I've just taken to heart that warning by that gentleman over there, the lawyer, about wills, because Sue and I made one in 1995. Goodness me, it's gone yellow and it's like parchment now, but we need to do it. But I said to all of those guys in the room, I said, it's bad enough leaving a will that is contestable, which makes no sense in the time that it's supposed to be relevant. And I said, but there's much, much more, and I'm talking to men here, mainly. I said, there's a bigger problem that when you pass away, a invalid will is a problem. But I tell you what, I have seen so many people. I'm knocking on 70. I've been around and I'm very astute as to what people do and say and act and respond. And I said, a much bigger problem when you pass, and I'm talking to all these elderly gentlemen, I said, if you haven't opened up to your kids as to who you really are, as a man, you were a son at one stage, you were a husband, and then a father, and then a grandfather. And all of that is relevant for all of us to listen to. And I said, what I have found out, I was you might get this as a surprise, but I was quite precocious as a child. And I can remember all the family was in the front lounge when I was still at home. And we were in front of the roaring fire and we were watching the TV. And my dad was on a two-seater, mum was over there, my two brothers, older brothers were there, my younger brother was there, my sister was there. And I just looked at my dad and he just doted on me, but he was a closed book. Do you know what I mean? I didn't know much about his childhood or anything like that, what made him who he was. And he told me some things that he wanted to go to university to become a lawyer, funnily enough. And he couldn't because his dad dropped dead in 1929 when the Depression started. And so as the eldest son, he had to go and find a job because there was no pensions for a widow, nothing. There was either starvation or go and find a job somewhere. And so Dad had to go and get a job, and all he could get at that time was an apprenticeship for a motor mechanic workshop. And he was so bitter about that. He told me about that later on. And he said, I knew that I had that responsibility for my three brothers and my sister and my mum. I had to do that. But he said to me, Stuart, all I ever wanted from my siblings was a thank you. And I got nothing. I gave up my desire to be a lawyer. And that's why he forced me into university to become a lawyer. He wanted to live through me. And I put a stop to that. But listen, what I said was, if you don't open up and have a relationship that you can leave with your children, they're going to say at your wake, I never really got to know Dad. And it's a pain in many children's hearts. And what I did that night in the lounge, in the front of the fire, watching TV, do you know what I did? I got up and I went down and I sat right beside Dad and I slung my arm in between his so he couldn't get away from me. And he was terrified. It's like I'd gone berserk and was going to kill him or something like that. He was like that. You know, it's that proximity. Men of that age didn't like that. You could shake hands, you could wave to people, but I locked him into me and I said, I want to know you, Dad. I want to know where you came from. I want to know about your mum and your dad and all the rest of it. Well, he looked at me. I said, well, where did your folks come from? Cornwall, son. And I said, which part of Cornwall? One of them came from Penzas, one of them came from Truro. And he told me a lot of stuff that happened back there, and I was absorbing it. And at the end of the day, I learned more about my dad in 25, I learned more that night about my dad than I had in 22 years. And I'm telling all of you men now, when we have these meetings, they're not just get-togethers. We're trying to build us up and be fathers and remember that we were sons and we're grandfathers and we're uncles and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, men have been forced into a sort of cone of silence about who they were, where they came from. And it's very important for these men's meetings to really open up and become real. And I gave all of the guys in the Bicton Presbyterian Church, which I've probably banned from now. No, I'm not. Because they actually gave me an ovation when I said that, because no one's ever said it to them before. And I got the idea from a will that is not relevant to not knowing anything about my dad after he dies and we talk about him and he's a mystery. Do you understand? I don't want any of us men to be mysteries to our kids and our grandkids. And I'm really good with my kids and my grandkids. So that's why we do these things. And the other thing is, Sue had a really bad turn at work yesterday, and I had to rush around and pick her up. She's still in bed. And Jim is really, really, really unwell. So prayers for both of them. And I can tell you, given the outcome of last night, we need to pray for this nation. We need to pray for this nation and the church within this nation. Because, and someone said to me on the chat, how on earth did this happen? And I said, listen, Canada, the UK, Australia and New Zealand are the World Economic Forum dummies. And everything they want to try on the whole world, they try on us first to see how it goes. And I can tell you more shocking things about what's been in the past. But someone said to me, how on earth, and I've got to be polite, did that individual get back in? And I said, the script was written long ago. You don't vote in anyone. And the last time we had scrutineers in our congregation and at the voting, and they were saying, came up to me and said, Stuart, you know, we were watching people who were taking the voting papers, and if they didn't like them, they would like that and go off onto the wrong pile. And it's all due to what's coming. And what's coming is, you know, we need Jesus by our side, I'll tell you right now. And that was a very good song, Leanne, we needed. What's going to happen, and there's a gentleman here, and I'm not going to specify him, but he came up before the service and he said to me, I love it that you know Chuck Missler. And I said, yeah, we had him around home several times when he was here. And I said, and he gave me the enthusiasm for prophecy, Bible prophecy. And I said to this gentleman, I said, you know, what Chuck and I used to talk about 30 years ago, it's now here. And we're in it. And we're under it. And the message now, and it's all about Rahab and Jericho, take out of it that if she can bring those walls down, or Joshua can, we can do the same. And I'm not saying that we can change history, but we can do something for the church within this nation. And I'm telling you that. And more about that in the next few weeks. All right, I'm going to finish off Hebrews because I'm going to start another series. And what is Revelation is to the New Testament. This book is going to be the Revelation to the Old Testament. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And also the Matthew 24 and 25. You know, a lot of people don't understand that Jesus gave us an incredibly detailed prophetic warning about the 20th century in Matthew 24 and 25. And it is so powerful and so accurate. So this is what the author of Hebrews just finished off these two verses. And by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down, It's Hebrews 11:30 and 31. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down by what? Not by a bulldozer, not by explosives, not by cannons, nothing. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. And never forget that. Your faith, your prayers are far more powerful than anything that we can go out and procure. Do you understand? And we sometimes don't even believe that. And after the Israelites had marched around them for 7 days, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, and that's the only time I'm going to mention to her as a prostitute. The other meaning of that Hebrew word is innkeeper. And the whole part of this message is how the two spies met her, where they lodged and all the rest of it. It certainly wasn't an establishment of ill repute. It would have been the inn in that city. And so the Hebrew word does mention in context immoral behaviour, but it doesn't suit this context. And listen, I make sure that I get things right before I come up and speak to you. But I sometimes think that sort of not very carefully spoken Christians go up to heaven in the rapture, and you come face to face with Rahab and you say, oh, well, you were a prostitute. You know, please don't do that. How was the inn? Start off your conversation. How was the inn? Do you know what I mean? Instead, and you know what? For those of you who are new here, I tell the congregations year after year after year, when we meet people who are born again, well, not born again in the Old Testament, they've got the Holy Spirit on them, not in them, but when they are righteous and believers right to the end, you and I, do you get this? You and I can relate to them when we're in heaven, because they will be in heaven. Do you understand? Where are they right now? When Jesus ascended in Ephesians chapter 4, he took captive up there, he took paradise up there and stuck it to the third heaven. And how do I know that? On the cross, when Jesus was about to die and the other guy on his right was about to die, he's not a thief, he was an insurrectionist. And the one that was substituted for Jesus was a false Christ, and he started up trying to get an army together to attack the Romans. And so the Romans don't crucify thieves. It's far too expensive. Do you understand? They just either cut their hand off or they stab them through. They don't go, because it takes 4 Roman soldiers to be around every cross. And sometimes in Josephus, he recorded that some of the people on the cross could take days to die. And that means you've got 4 Roman soldiers there 24 hours a day, and it costs a lot of money. It's an economic thing. And so you don't ever execute by crucifixion thieves. So he was an insurrectionist. And that guy on Jesus' right said, Lord, when you come into your kingdom, please remember me. And Jesus said to him, I tell you this day you will be with me in paradise. Down there. That's where paradise was. Luke 16, verses 19 onwards, Lazarus and the rich man, they both died. And Lazarus was a believer, so he went down into the bosom of Abraham, otherwise known as the paradise. And the rich man was not a believer, and he went to the hot place. Now, the interesting thing is that there was a gulf between them. They could see each other, they could talk to each other, but they could not cross over. Do you understand? There is a void between the lost and the saved, and it cannot be crossed after you die. Do you understand? It's set in concrete. And so by faith, the prostitute Rahab did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Right, Joshua chapter 2. Then Joshua the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim. Now, can I have the map, guys, please? I don't want this as much as I want the map on it. Right, I'm very happy about this map. This is down here, the Dead Sea. That's the Sea of Galilee. That's the Mediterranean. That's Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon was the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus and Peter, James and John. And then Noah and Elijah turned up. This is Jerusalem over here. Jordan River, Dead Sea, and here is Gentile territory. And this here is either the Acacia Grove, it's got several names. The Acacia Grove, it's the plain of Moab, and it's Gentile territory. And this is where, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, this is where, under Joshua, the Israelite people gathered because they had to cross the Jordan to get into Canaan and to take it, and it was a promise of God that they could do that. And so it's very interesting. So Joshua the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from this plain of Moab, this Shittim, saying, "Go and view the land, especially Jericho." It was the main walled fortress to keep people out of that particular plain. And so they went and entered the house of, the innkeeper, for whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And, who did she marry? Come on. Quiz. Salmon, one of the 2 spies. They got married later. Do you understand? And in Matthew chapter 1, I think it's verse 5, she's actually mentioned as the wife of Salmon in the line of Jesus. That's why I think it's an innkeeper. That's not to say that Jesus won't save anyone, but the context in this, for me, is an inn. So they went and entered the house of the innkeeper, for whose name was Rahab, and they what? They lodged there. Do you get it? They lodged there. You don't go to a place of ill repute and lodge there. It's in and out, apparently. Never been to one, don't want to go one, but that's apparently what I've been told, that's what happens. And so they lodged there. And in verse 2, but it was told to the king of Jericho, because there would be a lot of people in the inn. And I tell you what, they were common in ancient times. How do I know? Because Jesus had a parable of the Good Samaritan, didn't he? He said there was a Jew beaten up on the road down to Jericho from Jerusalem, and a Levite, an ordinary believer in Jesus in the tribe of Levi, walked past the guy unconscious on the ground and kept going. After that, the priest, who should have known better, walked past him, had nothing to do with it. And who turned up? A Good Samaritan. And they were the hostile enemies of the Jews. And yet this Good Samaritan picked up the guy, put him on his donkey, and he took him to where? The inn. So there's inns there. Jesus even mentions the inns in the parable. And he says this, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to spy out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to spy out all of the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, listen to what she said, "The king knows that 2 of them are in her establishment, and he wants her to turn them over." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from." Lie number one. Do you understand? Lie one, because we get into it. Okay. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. Lie number two. And I've got a really wonderful, deep message about the conundrum of righteous lies. Do you know what I mean? It's really interesting. It really is interesting. It starts in Exodus chapter 1 with the Hebrew midwives, and the Pharaoh had told them, if a Jewish child is a girl, she's allowed to live, and if it's a boy, you have to kill the male child. And they said yes, and did they do it? No. And so they said, and when the Pharaoh said, why have you disobeyed my order? They said, well, the Hebrew women are very vigorous and they give birth very early and we don't have time to get to them. Another righteous lie, do you understand? Because if they obeyed Pharaoh, there would have been no Israelite nation. And so these are really interesting things. Because there's Exodus 1 with the Hebrew midwives, there's Joshua 2 with Rahab. In 2 Kings 19, there's a really, really, really troubling passage there with Micaiah. And you get 2 Thessalonians 2, where God says, there is a time, and I was taught this by a very good teacher, there is a time when God is finished with mercy upon people. Do you understand? It's gone to the end and nothing else is going to change. So in 2 Thessalonians 2, he says, I will send the people of the earth at the end of halfway through the tribulation, a strong delusion. A strong delusion. What is the strong delusion? It's the Antichrist, because he's the one that went into the temple and declared himself God. And if you wanted to live and in safety under this guy's rule, you had to take what? The mark. You know, we had the grandkids on Friday, and we went to lollipops, right? It's relevant. And we went to lollipops, and what they do, they're very good. They put an invisible stamp on the hands of your grandkids. Then they give Sue a little piece of paper that's also got those 2 different stamps, right? And the lovely young lady said, wait, with both kids there with their hands there with this thing and this one. And they said, oh, shine a torch on it and you can see the invisible mark on your hand. And so she showed Ari and Odea, and they went, ooh. And I said to the girl, that must be the mark of the beast. And you know what? She laughed because she knew all about it. I was fascinated. And the kids went off that, so we couldn't have a long conversation about the mark of the beast, but it was that sort of moment. And so... But she had brought them, verse 6, up onto the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men, this is the servants of the king of Jericho, pursued them on the road to Jordan. And so if the thing was there, I would show you that these servants of the king would be rushing to the Jordan to catch them before they went over to foreign territory. But at the end of the day, they were in the flax on the top of Rahab's house or inn. And so the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the crossing places, and as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate of the establishment. All right, verse 8. Now, before the spies lay down, she came up to them on the roof. And listen to this passage. It is like dynamite, and said to the men, "This is Rahab. I know that the Lord has given you the land." How does she know? They've just turned up as spies, as subversives, right? She knows, everyone knows that on the other side of the Jordan River, there's up to several million Israelites who have made it through the wilderness, and everyone knows they're there. That's where they were parked when Balaam and the king of Moab was trying to get him to curse them by being in his land. And so they were waiting for the right time and the right orders to cross the Jordan and lay waste to Jericho. And Jericho was, as I said, the fortress that protected that plain that it was on. And it's really fascinating because when this particular Jericho is destroyed because of faith, by faith, there's another Jericho rebuilt, but it's alongside the ruins of the old one. And I'll give you a reason why in a couple of new messages coming out. And so in verse 8, "Now before the spies lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, 'I know that the Lord,'" now she's calling, "the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us." They've got 40 years of gossip coming from the wilderness and all of the people who have known what's happened under Moses in the wilderness and all of the victories that they've had to get there, especially the one about the Red Sea. "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land have despaired because of you," because they thought that the Israelites were going to wipe them off. And verse 10, "And for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt." And that's why I get so irritated by the maps in the back of your Bibles, because they've got coming down from Goshen, where they were staying, and they went right up and into the wildernesses near Beersheba. The maps don't show you that they crossed the Red Sea. Well, I wish that Rahab had drawn a map where they crossed, and I've got a brilliant DVD about that, and I put one on the chat a few weeks ago, and if you watch that, it's a very good. I had to cut it down. Okay, "And what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan," that's over in Gentile territory. That was Sihon, King Sihon. He was of Ammon, and Og, who was king of Bashan. Now, what is particular about Bashan? Og was this king of Bashan, and it was on the Gentile side of the Jordan River. But his people were giants. Do you understand? And it's absolutely fascinating, because in Psalm 22, when David was recording what Jesus was saying on the cross, among the terrors that they were trying to get to Jesus, Jesus says, "I am surrounded by the bulls of Bashan." And that means the demons that came from that wicked place ruled by Og were around in spiritual nature around the cross of Jesus Christ. It's really interesting. I wish I could preach for 3 hours at a time and fill it all in, but we have to get going. And so, and what you did to the two kings, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. This was by the faith of Moses and the faith by Joshua. And when we heard these things, verse 11, our report of these reports, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any longer of us because of you. For the Lord, now listen to this. This is a Gentile woman running a pub in my estimation, and busy one, and she's got family all around her in that establishment. And she said, our hearts melted and no courage remained in anyone because of you. For, listen to it, the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on the earth below. What a statement of faith and theological knowledge by that woman. Do you understand? And she got that by listening to information that they were getting from the people who watched the Israelites come through the wilderness for 40 years. And you know, it's always fascinating to me. I always go, ding, light bulb, when a Gentile in the Old Testament talks about the Lord of God, he is God in heaven. And several of the people in the Old Testament have said that, and the most memorable that comes to my mind is Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4, when he went insane because of his vanity over the huge statue of gold, which Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I had to say that. My daughter gets a chance to preach at her church twice a year. and I said to her, can I watch it on YouTube? She said, yes, Dad, but no comments. All right? And halfway through, I just cracked up. It was all about having a personal relationship with God, and it was very good. And she said, you know, there are three heroes of mine in the Old Testament that had a real relationship with God. And she said, I'll give you the names, but I'll go Meshach, Shadrach, and she said, I better be careful with this next name, because if Dad's watching this YouTube, I'll be in trouble if I don't say Abednego. So I've even got my daughter saying it, right? Listen, it's not Abednego. That's a city in country Victoria. A town over there. I don't know why people say that. And Cyrus, the king of Persia, also said that in Ezra chapter 1, verse 2. And in verse 12 in the Joshua one, now then, this is Rahab speaking to the two spies. Please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you will also deal kindly with my father's household and give me a pledge of truth. Now they're about to make between Rahab and the two guys a blood oath, and it's fascinating. And this is common in the ancient time. And spare my father, my mother, and my brothers, and my sisters, and all who belong to them, and save our lives from death. When she's listing her family, what's missing? Yeah, husband. Because God has planned her to marry Salmon later on. All right? Oh, that rhymes. No. Well, how could she have children? She wasn't married. She was a righteous believer. Do you understand? Mark that down. Single woman in business. I like that. I like that, the question, because the answer is obvious in the verses. So the men said to her, our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours. So they're agreeing to it. And it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Their promise. That's their promise to Rahab. And she says, and then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the what? City wall. And remember that in another few minutes. So that she was living on the wall. And she said to them, go to the hill country, that is on the left-hand side in that map, and that's where Jerusalem is. Go to the hill country so that the pursuers will not encounter you, because they went to the Jordan and Salmon and the other guy went up into the mount where Jerusalem is. And he said, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterwards you may go on your way. And they would make a wide berth of Jericho. And verse 17, and the men said to her, we shall be exempt from this oath to you, which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land and into the city, you tie this cord of scarlet thread. Now, scarlet thread, that's interesting, in the window through which you let us down, and gather into your house your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. And the reason why is a couple of the really good commentators said he thinks that rope was dipped in blood. That's why it's a scarlet thread, because it's a blood oath. And I'll tell you why. Because in the next couple of verses, and it shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house outside when we've attacked the city will have his blood on his own head, and we will be innocent. So stay inside, you're safe. Go outside, the deal's off. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood will be on our head if a hand is accidentally laid on him. And verse 20, but if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be exempt from the oath which you have made us swear. And she said, Rahab said, according to your words, so be it. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window as the reminder of a blood oath between them. Because in verse 19, one of the spies said, his blood will be on his own head. And if anyone stays in the house, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. That's why it's a blood curse. In verse 22, so they departed and came to the hill country, and they remained there for 3 days. Interesting, 3 days, until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had searched for them all along the road, but had not found them. Then the two men returned and came down from the hill country, and they crossed over the Jordan and came to Joshua the son of Nun. Then they reported to him all that had happened to them. And in verse 24, and they said to Joshua, the Lord indeed has handed over to us all the land. Furthermore, all of the inhabitants of the land have despaired because of us. And that's all because they met Rahab, and she filled in their position as to the Israelites across the river. And we just jump very quickly, very briefly to Joshua chapter 6, verses 15 and 17. And prior, in the first 14 verses of this thing, they articulate that when the Israelites had crossed the Jordan, they had gone and marched around the city once a day for 6 days. Do you understand? And they went round this day, the next day, the next day, but only one circle around that. Then on the seventh day, in verse 15, they got up early at dawning of the day and marched around the city in the same way 7 times on the 7th day. There's the number of 7s in the Bible is unbelievable, almost uncountable. Only on that day did they march around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, the priests blew their trumpets. Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And I love this. I absolutely love this, because way back in 2001, we took our kids to Russia on a missionary trip with other people from Perth. And we were given by the Finnish supervisors of our work over in Russia. They said, we're going to send you to a camp outside of St. Petersburg. It was about an hour and a half train journey from St. Petersburg to this little town called Lastochka. And it was a lovely little town. And we got put into the camp, the summer camp where all of these kids go to for a few weeks in the summer. And it was, we marched in, and typical Aussies, how you going, mate? And they were going like that. They were really, really upset, and because they just never seen anyone like that. And anyway, so what happened was none of the staff would hardly talk to us. The camp supervisor was a lovely lady, and she talked to us. But she said, you'll find it very difficult to talk to the staff, to the supervisor, the children's supervisors, and to the children themselves. They would be curious, but they will stay away from you. And so we had 3 days where nothing happened. And we used to have daily devotions in one of the rooms that we were in. We had Sharon, who was our boss, and there was 3 Russian girls who were, speakers for us. And there was us. And so we were frustrated on the 3rd day because we had not made any entry into their lives at that time. And we only had 18 days there. And you know what? This is what my wife said. Do you think we should do the same thing as they did in Jericho? And I said, what? She said, I think to break the spiritual barrier that we are facing, we as a group should walk around the outer fence of this camp 7 times. And I looked out the window and it was drizzling. And I said, I don't want to do that. I'll get wet. But the majority won, okay? And so all of us got out there and we started walking in this little cluster of people, and we walked around praying around the fence of this camp. And we did it for 7 times. And we came back and we came into our room and we were all pooped because it was quite a sort of uphill and downhill type thing. And anyway, we thought, well, we've done it. Now, the 3 Russian girls who were our interpreters were called to the manager's office. And the manager said, what on earth were you guys doing this morning? And the girls, 2 of the girls were very good Christians. One was yet to be saved, and she got saved just after we left. And they said to Natasha, they said, it's in the Bible that the Israelites walked around Jericho 7 times and then the walls came down. And Natasha was a lovely person, but not a believer. And she says, oh, I think you're all mad. But anyway, but you know what? At lunchtime, all the staff came into the dining room and they were asking in Russian to our 3 girls, what were you guys doing? And the girls said they were praying for you and praying for Russia and praying for this. Wow. Talk about the walls coming down like that. And I'll give you the result. That lady there was in charge of the laundry. She was the laundretter, all right? And this is on the 3rd day in the afternoon. And we used to go down to the laundry and take our clothes in because it was muddy and all the rest of it. And for the first 3 or 2.5 days up till here, wouldn't even talk to us. She'd point to, do that, cold as ice, do you know what I mean? And when she found out that we had been walking around the camp, and we did it 7 times, and praying for them and praying for Russia, the walls came down. And on the last day of our stay there, she came up to me in tears. And she said, "You must promise me to come back next year. You must promise," right? And so that was me. And Sue there's a one here of Sue, and the kids just adored her. I mean, most kids do. The little girl there, Eula, and she was begging Sue every day, "Can you please adopt me and take me to Australia?" And every day she was pleading in tears to take her to Australia. Do you know why? She was about 14 there, and at the age of 16 they're kicked out of the system and put on the streets, and they're picked up by pimps. And that's the only future that most of them will face. And that's why she was so desperate to come to. But even if we wanted to, and we did want to, Sue did, the whole problem was the Russian authorities wouldn't let the kids go anyway, because they're the workforce for the future. And it was really heartbreaking. And she was just in tears the day we got on the bus and left. And we had my 12-year-old son, and he was really tall. For 12, he was huge. Very, very, very loved by all the girls in the camp, you know what I mean? And we had to be very careful with him around the girls and that sort of thing. But there was a little guy who was had a huge defect in his body. He was a dwarf, basically, and his name was Choo Choo. And he just idolised Ben. Everywhere where Ben went, Choo Choo went. And when the bus turned up and my son was walking to the bus, Choo Choo had his arms around one of his legs, and Ben was dragging Choo Choo to the bus because they didn't want him to go. And it's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. But what can you do? And so verse 17, "But the city shall be designated for destruction. It and everything that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the innkeeper and all who are with her in her house shall live." This is Solomon and the other one talking to Joshua. "Because she hid the messengers whom we sent." And why did she do that? By faith. And she was the one who designated the God of Israel as the God in heaven. She understood and she worshipped the God of heaven. And she was a Gentile, I'm going to say innkeeper. And don't try and bring it, I just don't like it. I don't think it doesn't fit the narrative. And you know, I was absolutely not surprised about the event last night. And this is where the takeout is of this. If you have the faith and you acknowledge the God of heaven as your Lord and your Saviour, when God is on our side, physical walls and spiritual walls can also fall down through the prayers of faithful believers. How many of you here actually believe that? If you pray to the God of heaven, full of faith, something's going to happen. Maybe not immediately, but something is going to happen. Rahab is someone that you will meet in heaven for eternity because of her faith, because of her active, strong faith in a God that she was never brought up with as a child, but learned about in her maturity because of what happened in the 40 years of the wilderness. And so just to close the chapter, and what more shall I say? This is Hebrews 11:32. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon. This is the hall of faith. Listen, Gideon had an army and he was going to go to war. And the army was on 32,000 people. And God said to Gideon, get rid of most of them. Just tell them to go. You're not going to fight for me. And so 22,000 went home on one day, and that left 10,000. And that still wasn't good enough for God. And he said to Gideon, and he put a test to the 10,000, and they had to go to a lake and they had to either lap it or put it up in a cup. And out of the 10,000, only 300 did as God said through Gideon. Do you understand? 300 out of 32,000, and they had victory against their enemies. Do you understand? We often say the church is small and not this one. I think half people are bereaved today and are just crying their eyes out about last night. But listen, God's in control of everything. And he's in control of every one of you and I. Our lives, our destiny, our rewards, our faith, and that's what we give him to us. And so, and 300 people did what 32,000 were worried about. And this is why this particular chapter in Hebrews is so important for us in these days. And, you know, we're living the things that we were told by our prophecy teachers 20, 30 and 40 years ago. It's all happening now. If you know, Rome, and I'm going to start next week on that message, Rome, when it split into two legs, half of them stayed in Rome and the other half went over to the east to what we call now Istanbul. And the emperor called it Constantinople at that time. And so there was two legs of the Roman Empire. That was Nebuchadnezzar's gold, silver and bronze and iron statue. And it's interesting, most of us, and I'm being honest, and if people say that, oh no, I knew that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the toes mixed with clay and iron always had our minds spinning. We couldn't put it together. And do you know what you need? If you don't know, wait for progressive revelation to be shown to you. It's as that, you know, if you're really naughty to a kid at Christmas, you give them a big square box and they go, oh, is this my present? Yes, it is. And they go, wrap, unwrap, 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 until it's a dinky toy in a little box. Do you know what I mean? But that's what progressive revelation is. You don't know until you unfurl all of the covers that we can't see through. And so we are living in this time now. And the World Economic Forum, forget Schwab, it's an organisation. And it's an organisation that is the forerunner of the 10 Kingdom world governing system, which I will be getting into from next week onward, because we're living in it right now. We're living in it right now. And so that's Gideon. And then you have Barak and Samson, Jephthah and David. And David is the only one in this passage, is the only king. All the others are judges or prophets. And Samuel and the prophets who by faith conquered kingdoms, that's Joshua and David, performed acts of righteousness and obtained promises, that's Abraham, Moses, David and Solomon, shut the mouths of lions, Samson and Daniel, quenched the power of fire, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, escaped the edge of the sword, David killing Goliath, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. And by the way, that's what our job is now, in faith, in prayer, to do and push back what has happened over in the eastern states. And if you think, oh, we can't do that, it's too big. No, well, get your faith meter and get it stirred up, because that's what we've got to do. Women receive back their dead by resuscitation. Does that say resurrection? Resurrection's wrong. Jesus was the first fruits of resurrection. If someone was resurrected back, like the widow of Nain's son, or Jairus' daughter, or what's the other one? Lazarus, Mary and Martha's brother, they were not resurrected, they were resuscitated. Because guess what? They died later on. It's resuscitation. That's a shocking mistake in translation. And others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. Oh no, that's a resurrection. Yeah, that's when they get to go up. And others experienced mocking and flogging and further chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, Stephen. They were sawn in two, Isaiah by King Manasseh. They were tempted. They were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goat skins. That's Elijah and John the Baptist. Being destitute, afflicted, tormented, people of whom the world was not worthy. Wandering in deserts, on mountains, and sheltering in caves and holes in the ground. And I asked myself, and I've put it in my message, is this our future? Because I tell you what, Christianity is number one enemy of the government that has just come to power. And if you don't believe that, you better wake up. And all these have gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, but because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made complete. There's no such thing as perfect in the Bible. Give me a break. Now, this chapter 11, this is my final statement. Now, this chapter 11 of Hebrews, emphasizing faith, is so relevant to you and me in our immediate future. Our immediate future. How many of you guys get regular emails from Nick Goyrin, a member of the upper council in our Western Parliament? Well, shame on you. Get them. Sign up for them. And I received one just a couple of days ago from him, and Nick was asking Parliament why Roger Crook asked WA, I shouldn't say that, but he asked the WA Treasury. Do you know this? He asked the WA Treasury for $3 billion. Just in little old WA. And for unspecified future needs. This is what this whole message is about. It's not about these guys for 3,000 years ago. It is about you and I in this town, in this state, in this country now. He asked for $3 billion for unspecified future needs. And if we are weak-willed in our prayer life, let me warn and advise you to get down on your knees daily, even hourly if needed, because there is going to be hell on earth within weeks and days. First on the agenda is the incoming federal government, is the annihilation of Christianity in this country. Do you know, we always had opposition from members of the public who weren't believers, right? And it was a bit sort of, it was only verbal. But let me tell you, it's not going to be verbal. And the stuff that's been promulgated in state parliaments, especially Victoria, is just out and out persecution of Christianity. Albanese has already approved, listen to this, 300,000 visas. He's already approved them. Visas in February, and that will mean an invasion of this country by mercenaries already waiting to come and impose what I think is martial law. Russia, Iran, Turkey and Kush and the Maghreb already have the infrastructure in Syria for the Magog War of Ezekiel 38 and 39. They've got everything ready. That's why Israel is building forward bases to try and stop it coming from Syria. Europe, including the UK, is financially on its knees and desperately needs a war to declare fault on the trillions of euros they owe. And do you know who they owe it to? The citizens of Europe that they've stolen from. If they want to get their superannuation, if they want to get their bank accounts, it's all gone. It's all gone. They are possibly preparing, this is the European Commission, are preparing a horrendous false flag event in Ukraine and blame it on Russia, therefore triggering a war between Russia and Europe. And Martin Armstrong, 2 months ago, predicted this because of the computer Socrates, and I'll mention that in a minute. And so that will trigger a war between Russia and Europe. And the main instigator behind the scenes of this is no other, do you know? Which of you are from Old Blimey? Do you know Boris Johnson? He's the troublemaker. He's the boy they send to stir things up. Actually, and I've said it here in my thing here, Putin doesn't need anything else because he's got the Donbass, which is the Russian slice of the Ukraine, and he's also got the Crimea back again, which was Russian. And so he's done with war. But Europe needs a war because every time they have a war, they can default on all of their debts and start again. And guess who pays? The mug in the streets. Trump is considering pulling the US out of NATO to avoid war with Russia because Article 5 of the NATO Constitution stipulates that if one NATO state is attacked, all the others have to respond. And you know, Martin Armstrong's supercomputer, that even the World Economic Forum tried to buy off him because it has never been wrong in 40 years, has been tracking the huge transfer of physical gold and silver bullion out of Europe and into the US. Martin remarks that when a nation faces economic disaster, they always start a war and default on national debt. Albanese, for the last 3 years, has been spending like a gambling drunk, and we now have debt that we cannot possibly repay under normal conditions. And by the way, did you notice about 5 weeks ago, Chinese spy ships have circumnated Australia in broad daylight? Do you know one of them was anchored just off Rottnest? Are you all awake to this? I hope so, because it's no shock to me. If you are daily prayer warriors, please accelerate. And if you are lax in this area, ignite the habit, because only God can defend us now. And this is why I featured this faith chapter now, to sharpen our sense of reality as to the world we live in. We now live by faith in the God of heaven. Father, we just thank you for this time. We just thank you so much that you have protected us this far and thus far. And Father, in the days, weeks, and months to come, Father, may we see your strong hand of protection upon us, upon our families, upon those who you are trying to get people saved, Father, your workmates, your friends, your sports club members. I just pray for it, Father. But we need to have faith in our God to deliver us, whatever that takes and whatever that means. And all God's people said,